Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, does mainstream US media value all lives equally, or are some worth more coverage than others? There are times when social media breaks a story and then makes traditional media follow that story. That is exactly what we're seeing in the news right now. Malika Bilal, our digital producer, what are you seeing online?
Well, this is mostly being talked about with hashtag Chapel Hill shooting. And as of Thursday, that had 1.6 million mentions. So take a look at what some of those tweets look like. These are short videos uploaded as vines, and many of these are of the memorial service on Wednesday and the burial on Thursday. So for those of you at home who want to join this conversation, we want you to use the hashtag AJStream.
Now joining us right here in the studio, we have Rania Halak, and Rania is an independent journalist. Rania, it's great to have you here in the stream, and we'll hear more from you in just a moment.
Hi, this is Imam Sohaib Webb, and I am definitely in the stream.
The murder of 3 Muslim American students has sparked outrage online, with accusations that the US media initially ignored the story because of their religion. 23-year-old Dia Barakat, his 21-year-old wife Yusur Abu-Salha, and her 19-year-old sister Razan were all fatally shot on Tuesday in the couple's apartment in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Their neighbor Craig Hicks has been charged with the killings. Police suspect that the motive to be a long-running dispute over parking, but family and friends of the victims are asking it to be investigated as a hate crime.
I just need to know what has going on. It's been hours.
That was Dia's father asking for information as details were slow to emerge. But social media very quickly took the lead. Immediately, criticism started flooding in over the lack of media coverage, and the hashtag Muslim Lives Matter began trending globally on Twitter. Now, many suggested that had the shooter been Muslim and the victims white, the act would have been labelled terrorism and topped headlines. So joining us to discuss this via Skype, we have Mohamed El Masri. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Communications at the University of North Alabama. Also, Asil El Borno is an American Muslim activist who grew up in the Chapel Hill area. It's good to have you in the stream, everybody. Rania, you're a journalist. If you look at the facts of this story, what makes it a national story in the United States?
Well, in the lead up to this, there's been this buildup of incitement and hatred towards Arabs and Muslims for the past couple months. And I think the media has played a pivotal role in that, in inciting against Muslims and Arabs. And I think that might be one of the reasons why this story and stories like this, where Arabs and Muslims are the victims, are ignored, because it goes against the narrative that we often hear, which is that, you know, Arabs and Muslims are the bad guys, and they're out to get us. And so I think that that's part of the conversation that's missing is this rampant Islamophobia and this rampant hatred of Arabs.
So I'm just looking here on my laptop here. Let me just share a tweet with you here. It's from Zayed Jilani. He says it took about 8 hours for a national news organization to cover the Chapel Hill shooting and about 15 for TV networks. Mohammed, this is the sort of thing that you study all of the time. You're an assistant professor of communications. This is your beat, as it were. I wasn't counting the hours, but there was definitely some kind of lag. How do you explain the lag? Is it a national story? Was it a national story? What do you think was going through the minds of news editors deciding we're going to go with this, we're not going to go with this?
Right. So I want to be fair to the news organizations. First of all, news didn't start even on social media breaking until pretty late in the evening on Tuesday night. So in some cases they're excused because they didn't know about it until many hours later. I think there has been a general lack of coverage. I think what Rania said is for the most part accurate. I agree with her. But I do want to point out that some news organizations have been covering the story. They've been covering the hate crime angle, and they've also humanized the victims, which is pretty rare. I do research on portrayals of Muslims. We don't get stories about Muslim victims very often in the Western news, especially the American news. But this was a case where at least some organizations, I just want to be fair.
Who's doing that, Mohammed? Who's doing it?
Who's doing it? Oh, yeah. CNN, the New York Times ran a story on their front page about that this was a likely hate crime. They discussed human personal details about the victims. which we call that humanization or personalization in the research literature, and that's not something that we see every day.
Right.
So I think we need to be fair from that standpoint.
Well, I want to bring in a different perspective. This is a tweet that we got that said, tragically, there are 42 homicides a year in the US. So only a small fraction will ever be covered by networks. But on the other side, Asil, we saw lots of tweets pushing back against that. Aina says the media is selective in what they choose to cover, and Muslims have plummeted down the rungs of societal ladder, hence no coverage. Do you relate to that tweet?
I think that the difference between covering the 42 homicides that we get throughout the year versus the 3 killings that happened to these Muslim Americans is that this is in fact a hate crime, and second of all, these don't ever get covered, hate crimes of Muslim Americans. There are between 100 to 120 hate crimes that happen per year in the United States towards Muslim Americans, and the fact that we actually were given the 3 seconds of limelight that these things are happening to our community, it is important, and it is different than the homicides that are happening across the nation.
Ronnie, I saw you nodding as Asil was speaking there. What's behind that agreement?
No, I mean, I actually agree with what you're saying, and I do think that there's also a massive double standard. I mean, it depends who the victims are, right? There are worthy victims and there are unworthy victims. And it also depends who the perpetrator is. And in this case, it was a white man who shot 3 Muslims in the head. I think it's wonderful that they're being humanized. I agree with that. But at the same time, I would argue that CNN has been, CNN did humanize them. They had a wonderful segment. But at the same time, CNN has been one of the networks at the forefront of pushing, of labeling all Muslims as, potential extremists. In the aftermath of the Paris attacks, in the aftermath of American Sniper, the movie that just came out, there's been this massive backlash towards Muslims and Arabs and people, being inspired to kill them. This needs to be talked about. This killing, this murder needs to be talked about in this context, because there's a bigger problem here. And that problem is that Arabs and Muslims are so demonized by politicians, by the media, to the point where there's a societal issue, there's a societal sickness that, I don't know if that played a role in inspiring this guy to do this, but, we have to be open to that and talk about it.
Mohamed?
Yeah. Can I jump in here? I agree with a lot of what Rania is saying, and I don't want my comments about some news outlets in this particular instance being fair, or at least relatively fair, to be sort of taken out of context. If you look at the research literature, there's no question that Muslim Americans and Muslims in general are stereotyped. The conversation is usually negative. Religion is highlighted when Muslims have done something bad. We usually don't hear about Islam except in the context of some atrocity where Islam is somehow
Mohamed, people are listening to you and saying, well, can you give us an example? You say research literature, but what do you want to share with us that actually backs that up?
Oh, there have been tons of studies. Folks can go back to Edward Said and his book covering Islam. But I'll give you a recent example. There's a researcher named Kimberly Powell who looked at all 11 terrorist attacks that occurred in the United States between 2001 and I think 2009. And she found that there were some committed by Muslims and some committed by non-Muslims. When the Muslims committed a terrorist attack or an attempted attack, they were blamed. Their religion was made prominent. Future attacks were described as likely. Links were drawn between the religion, Islam, and the perpetrators. The victims were more likely to be humanized. When non-Muslim Americans committed attacks, they were, in some cases, the attacks were explained, explanations were offered, political reasoning. They were humanized in some cases, and their victims were not as likely to be humanized. That's just one study.
Sure.
We have dozens of studies that have been done on this issue.
Mohamed, I'm just going to share this with you and with our audience as well. This is from Jay Relling. Have a look here on my laptop. This has been shared quite extensively on social media. Here's your guide to understanding the news. Just scoot down here. American News Guide to Violence. And then we have a white perpetrator, disturbed loner. A black perpetrator would be a thug, and a brown perpetrator would be a terrorist. Does this resonate with you, Asil, at all?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that when crimes are committed by a white American male, most of the time it's because he's mentally ill. And most of the time, if an African American male commits the same crime, it's because he's a thug. And 9 out of 10 times, if it's a brown person, just like we had in the Texas shooting, the Muslim soldier, he was not given the same treatment as a white man would have. He was,
and that was Nadel Hassan,
linked to terrorism.
And that happened, I believe, at a military base in Texas.
Right.
That was a little while ago. Is this just a feeling you get in your gut, or do you just see it all of the time? Where are we with this in terms of how do you document it, or how do you live it? Do you always see Arab Americans or Muslim Americans just portrayed in this way?
I believe in the media and absolutely in Hollywood. But, just to shift the conversation just a little bit, I grew up in North Carolina, and I'd have to say that growing up there and being in such a diverse community, we are surrounded by some of the top universities in the United States, Duke, Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, NC State. You see pretty open-minded Americans of all color and creed. And so for something like this to happen, very unusual, and I think our community was really shocked because you don't ever assume that your next door neighbor would do something like this to your child, to your sibling.
Right.
So, maybe the media has portrayed us as the enemy, and maybe Hollywood has, but I think your average American, doesn't want to jump to that conclusion. Your average American wants to get along with every race and every religion.
Rania, picking up on something Asil said about the perpetrators and mental health often coming into the picture, we got this comment from someone who pretty much echoes her. This is on Google Plus, and Hafsat says, I don't think there's disillusion or mental health problems when it comes to Muslim violence, but when it comes to acts by non-Muslims, she says she sees there always has to be a reason for them behaving the way that they did. And before you pick up on that, I want you to listen to this video comment from someone who's thinking along the same lines. Have a listen.
What of the fact that major mainstream news organizations headlined the Charlie Hebdo incident as terrorists shoot at magazine editors, but in this case it's just a man shot Muslim students? What about the fact that now mainstream news organizations are reporting about the availability of parking space as opposed to the heinous crime that has gone on?
Smiling there as she said that, and that's of course what the police have said.
Well, that's because that's what the shooter said. The shooter said it was a dispute over the parking space. That's what the police are basing this off of. That's what his wife said in a bizarre press conference that she had yesterday, was this is over a parking spot. And I found it shocking that the police immediately said, okay, this was over a parking dispute. That's what we're investigating. That's what it looks like, without having talked to any of the victim's family. Families have said that there's been a pattern with this man. He's been harassing them. They felt threatened by him. One of the victims had said that he doesn't like us because of who we are. There was complaints that they were speaking Arabic too loudly. And this doesn't seem to have resonated with the police. I mean, I really do find that shocking. But on another note, with the whole mental illness thing, yes, I mean, when there are white perpetrators, and let's remember that in the United States, the vast majority of mass shooters are white men, and almost every time it's a big news story, it's immediately, they were mentally deranged, they were mentally ill, they're a lone wolf, or it was over a parking spot, or it was because of loud music, which was the case with Jordan Davis, who was gunned down by a man named Michael Dunn in Florida over supposedly loud music. It was a black teenager gunned down by a white man. There's constantly this attempt to kind of downplay the societal issues that may have led to these acts. When we talk about mass shootings or we talk about mass killings like this, and a white man does it, like, we need to ask why. Why is there this culture of violence among white men? And I mean that genuinely. Why in this country is that needs to be asked, it needs to be discussed. At the same time, when we talk about Muslims who might commit a crime, we never hear, were they mentally ill? We never hear that. We never hear what was their mental status. It's immediately terrorism. And I'm also shocked that the president of this country has yet to say anything about this killing. What would you want him to say? Well, just offer condolences. I mean, last year when a white nationalist shot up people outside a Jewish community center in Kansas, the President of the United States gave his condolences.
All right, Rania, take a breath because Mohammed, go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback before I lose my train of thought on something that Rania said, and also something that Al-Sil said. First of all, this issue of worthy and unworthy victims, it's really important, and it's been confirmed in a lot of research that there are some people that are, when they're victims of crimes, their victimization is deemed worthy and legitimate. And this is not just in terms of Muslim and non-Muslim. If you look at African Americans in the United States, for example, black victims of white crimes are not as likely to be humanized in American news reports. White victims of black crimes are more likely to be humanized. That's just one example.
How does that humanization process happen, Mohammed? Do we hear
they talk
background
about them?
Do you see nice pictures?
They talk about their names. You see pictures. They reference their family members, their occupations, and other personal factors from their lives, hobbies, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I wanted to say, because I think Al-Sil said something really important about entertainment media, which I think is lost in all this. I'm interested in kind of the cumulative effect of decades of Hollywood movie portrayals of Arabs and Muslims as terrorists and bad guys. That has an effect. One of the leading media scholars in the world, a guy by the name of Jack Shaheen, did a 100-year content analysis. He examined more than 900 movies that featured Arabs and Muslims, and his conclusion was that, I'm simplifying a little bit, but there are basically just 3 or 4 roles for Muslims in Hollywood, and they're all bad.
All right,
so what are the effects of if you're watching these movies? What's the cumulative effect? I think we have to start to ask that question.
But and I always have this issue with entertainment and then impacting us as a community. I really think that the world is smarter than go to see a movie and then the next Arab American that you meet you think is a terrorist. Or am I giving the American public too much in the way of thinking that they're too logical, right?
I think you're probably giving people too much credit.
Right. Okay.
And we have research. There's a lot of research that suggests that people are affected. They've done experimental research. People are affected by the negative portrayals of African Americans, of Muslims, and other marginalized groups.
Asil, go ahead.
Craig Hicks actually now has a fan page that has followers that say that
he's the person who
did a great job.
He's the person who came forward and said, yes, I was responsible for these 3 murders.
Absolutely, yes. So he has a fan page that now has people who are saying, you're our hero. You did a great job. What you did was right. And, that's very scary. They don't realize that first of all, they're being monitored. Second of all, do you know what an impact that's making on the Arab American community? I have friends who are afraid of letting their kids go to school today, to go to their preschool, because they feel like there might be a backlash against Muslims across the United States, even though they were the victim.
That's what I don't get, Asil. How can there be a backlash against the community that are the victim?
It kind of reminds me...
Well, because we exist.
Well, it kind of reminds me of ICE.
Because...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Asil.
No, I mean, basically, the backlash is because we exist. We have become part and parcel of this culture and this society, and there are people who don't like that. Right. And so, the fact that we are getting on the news, that's because the fact that we are making a little bit of noise, the fact that we are showcasing 3 young people who are actually fantastic citizens of the world. They aren't terrorists. That makes certain people angry because it makes their claim illegitimate.
And Ronnie, I know you said that what Asil said reminds you of something. Before you mentioned that, I wanted to just read these tweets because they're echoing what she's saying. There's this fear from Warda who says, the media narratives threaten my safety as a person who wears a scarf, a hijabi, and a visible Muslim. The hate speech has real consequences. Diana says those media narratives have consequences for people who are visibly Muslim. We're scrutinized, we're told to leave if we don't like it.
Yeah, I would add what I was saying that I was reminded of was with ISIS whenever somebody's killed that's a Muslim. Like recently, there was the burning of the Jordanian pilot who was an Arab and Muslim man, and for some reason, the burning of an Arab and Muslim man to death elicited calls from people on social media to kill more Arabs and Muslims, elicited this hatred of Arabs. I mean, it's very bizarre the way that works, right? It's like Arab and Muslims being victims makes people mad at Arabs and Muslims.
I think also a lot of people are, I wrote an article yesterday, I published it on Al Jazeera about kind of this issue, and a lot of the commenters are very angry. They're saying, why are you're so upset just because there was one incident against Muslims when Muslim terrorists are killing so many people overseas? And that underscores part of the problem, is that our publics are so grossly uninformed. We don't see in the news media, for example, that the primary victims of ISIS, like Rania just pointed out, are Muslims. We don't see that we don't see that the overwhelming majority of Muslims reject ISIS, according to all of the empirical data that we have. We don't see that Muslim organizations, Islamic scholarly councils, associations, groups, whoever, denounces terrorism repeatedly until they're blue in the face, and yet somehow the news organizations don't appear to see the denunciations, and then they ask the question, why aren't Muslims denouncing terror?
Meanwhile, I don't hear Americans denouncing the state-sanctioned terrorism that it's inflicted on Muslim countries routinely, with drone strikes from Yemen to Pakistan.
All right, so Rania, you're taking us off topic, right? You're making this super broad, and I want to make this personal. This is a personal story that rippled through the social media community, also the Arab American, the Muslim American community. You can make those broad points, but let's not use this really tragic situation to do that. Something here, though, on my laptop that really leapt out at me. This is Mali Post, and Mali Post says, don't be fooled. The only reason the story is being covered by the media now is because of the social media outbursts. Asil, I remember a few occasions where social media has really pushed traditional media to cover a story, but this particular incident is telling me what incredible power some of the community have to readdress some of these issues that we've all been talking about, stereotypes and the way that Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are being portrayed. And this was a way of maybe pushing back. How do you see it?
Absolutely. I think that the only reason why the mainstream media decided to cover the story is because people were hashtagging Chapel Hill shooting, Muslim lives matter, over and over and over again. And I know myself, I was linking articles left and right. And it wasn't for my Muslim American friends. It was for my non-Muslim, non-Arab friends to say, hey, look what happened. And, thankfully, I did have friends who reached out and said, we're sending our condolences and we're very sorry for your community and we're sorry that you're going through this. And that was really reassuring. I mean, I kind of needed to hear that there were people who still, they still want to be human and view others as human beings. So that was good. But yes, absolutely. If it wasn't for Twitter and Facebook blowing up, I don't think it would have been picked up. No.
We might not have had this very conversation right now. We have in our conversation Asil El-Borno. She is a Muslim American activist. Mohamed El Masri is an assistant professor of communications at the University of North Alabama. And Rania Halek is an independent journalist. We are taking them all to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. And there, if you want to add to the conversation, really easy to do. You can tweet us at #AJStream. Let me just check back in with Malika before we do that.
Well, that is what Rama Kudemi just did. She tweeted us this picture. This is in loving memory of the three victims, Dia, Yusur, and Razan.
We received so many video comments from the friends and family of Dia, Yusur, and Razan that we'd like to leave you with their memories of the three. And here they are. Take a look.
The fondest memory I have of Dia is when he was telling me about his engagement to Yusur. And he would stumble over his words, and he was hot and bothered, and if you know Dia, he never talked about girls.
I've watched Yusur shine and grow throughout the years. She's definitely a role model for all of us, and I wish I could just see her one more time.
He's sincerely one of the most kind-hearted, sincere, genuine people I've ever met.
Dia was a gentle giant. He was very tall, but also very kind and sweet-hearted.
The many memories I've had with Yusur is that our freshman year of college, we had agreed to bring each other lunches every Fridays.
One best memory that I have of Yusur is when we actually became best friends. It was 3rd grade.
One fond memory I have about Yusur is hanging out at Rena's house.
His legacy, I think, and this goes for Razan and Yusur as well, is just of humanitarianism and just caring and actually really looking at every individual as an individual and making sure that they feel welcome and that they feel accounted for.
Hello again, welcome to the Stream's online post show. We're continuing our discussion on the criticism that mainstream media was slow to cover the Tuesday murder of 3 Muslim American students in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This story that we're doing is really a story of social media pushing traditional media. Malika.
That is a great way to put it. And picking up on a point that before we entered into the post show, Asil was making about this breaking on social media. Christina on Twitter says the public backlash against the media's lack of coverage shows how citizens are creating a space for themselves. And she goes on to say, this is why citizen journalism is essential and popular. We're now demanding the news that we want to see, only better. And Rania, of course, you are a journalist. What advice do you give to people who are outside of the journalism field for wanting to make their stories heard, and this maybe being a watershed moment for that happening?
No, I completely agree with that entire sentiment. And I mean, if it wasn't for social media, I don't know that I'd be able to do my journalism the way that I do. Or that I'd be able to have a platform the way that I do, to talk about stories like this and other things. And I think that's what's great, is that people, ordinary people who aren't able to, be invited as guests on television, right? Are able to come together on social media and actually like make a story, push a story into the mainstream that was being ignored. I think that's a lot of power, a lot of people power, and it's so important, and it's really exciting when that's happened, even though it's in this big tragedy.
Mohamed, have you seen anything quite like this before in your experience as a communications professor?
There are examples of social media kind of taking over and then ultimately influencing both politics or political action on the ground, and then also mainstream media coverage. But I don't want us to lose focus on the mainstream coverage. I want us to hold CNN and the New York Times and Fox News and MSNBC and Al Jazeera to high standards, because I think so many more hundreds of millions of people consume those media products.
And also, how often can this happen? It can happen maybe in this case, maybe another case. Can the local communities still continue to actually press for their stories to become mainstream media stories? After a while, will mainstream media start ignoring that push, do you think?
Well, it's hard. I mean, it's not easy. Especially, we know why news gets covered the way it does, and I'm very critical of the way news is presented. It's very sensational. News coverage tends to lack balance, lack contextualization. It doesn't promote understanding. If it bleeds, it leads. We know all the sort of this is
Mohamed, this is a very broad brush. Are you saying all media in the United States does this?
No, not all. But
what percentage?
But we know, well, I can't give you a percentage, but there are consistent patterns, right? Okay. And so we have to hold these news organizations to basically higher standards of professionalism. Right. That's what I'm calling for.
I think also
go ahead.
Another way that we can combat this is to actually have more Muslim Americans and more Arab Americans in journalism and as producers and doing this great work that you guys are doing right now. I think that our community has been waiting for a lone hero, somebody that's going to come and rescue us out of the pits of Islamophobia. It's not going to happen. We have to train our kids and our siblings and our community that we have to be part and parcel of this society, and that means we have to not only be doctors and lawyers, we also need to go into journalism. We also have to go into acting. We also have to join Hollywood, because that's the way that our voices are going to be heard by the mainstream, and also to join local politics. I mean, we've got to be part of our government, and we have to fund our government. We have to stop thinking of ourselves as foreigners and start treating ourselves as Americans.
That's all fine and well, and I actually agree with you, but we also, and I keep going back to the same point, what about Muslim experts as sources in the news? Why don't we see Muslim experts called on CNN? Why don't we see African American sources? There's a systematic underrepresentation.
Can I answer that question? Just take my my host hat off. Let me answer that question. It's because if you're, and this is what Asil was saying, if you don't have Arab Americans, Muslim Americans in your newsroom, they won't have the right contacts file to find out that lawyer would be perfect. They happen to be a Muslim American lawyer. I'll call them to be the expert. You have to know the community and the network in order for you to actually be able to see the experts on the screen. If they have no Muslim friends, how are they going to have Muslim guests and experts on the show, Mohamed?
Absolutely.
Well, journalists are.
I'm putting back my host hat on right now, but I feel that that's really important. I've worked in a lot of newsrooms,
I think
and
that's
unless you share your contacts as a minority or as an ethnic group or as somebody from a diverse community, nothing's going to change.
Look, I think that's only part of the story.
Right.
Journalists are trained to cover press conferences. If CARE calls a press conference, more journalists should attend the press conference. All the journalists who cover these beats, they know the major Muslim organizations. They've heard of them. They have contacts with them. We have a basic reliance, a heavy reliance on official elite sources. This is documented in numerous studies. This is why journalists go to the government. They go to the police, as Rania was saying. They go to the police and then they just kind of parrot the police narrative in so many stories.
But if if your police chief is a Muslim American, right?
I don't think it's all about identity, though.
Yeah, that helps. Anyway, Mohamed and I are not going to get into it, but I am going to share the conversation with Malika.
And I'm going to pass it over to Donna on Twitter. And she wrote this. She says, we're at a moment in history where America's chronic problem with race, she says race, but I'm broadening this out to beyond race, is being examined. And that opens a space for this conversation now. So, Rania, you heard what Mohamed had to say and what Asil had to say on how to turn these hashtags and how to turn this anger into action. What would your advice be?
I mean, I'm not an organizer, and I'm not the one driving the conversation. I think it's people online that are doing it and people who are part of the community. And I think that's what's really important, is to kind of be listening to them and looking to them. And I think another great example, though, of what you mentioned earlier would be what happened in Ferguson. Kind of reminds me of pushing things into the mainstream. I agree that there need to be Muslims and there need to be more representation in Arabs in the media, in the mainstream, right? But I guess for me, because it's my role, is to be outside of that and to push from the outside. So I think that's important as well, is to have outlets and organizations on the outside doing the pushing as well, the way that people are on social media as well.
This conversation is not over yet. It will continue online. It will continue in many media organizations around the world and in Arab American, Muslim American communities as well. But for now, I'm going to say thank you very much to our guests, Rania Halek, Mohamed El Masri, and Asil El Borno. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Now, on the next show, lessons from the Holocaust. We'll speak to Jewish survivors and hear their personal take on why Holocaust remembrance matters today. Until then, I'll see you online.